the MCAT Cars Podcast, session number 18. The cars section of the MCAT gives thousands of pre-meds nightmares every night. Whether you're an ESL student, lack confidence while reading, or a slow reader like me, Jack Westin and the medical school headquarters are here to help you score higher in every section so you can be confident you're ready to get the MCAT score of your dreams. Welcome to the MCAT Cars Podcast. My name is Dr. Ryan Gray, your host here every week. I'm joined, as always, by Jack Westin from jackwestin.com, the premier MCAT Cars tutor online. If you have been struggling with the cars section of the MCAT or with any section, helping you improve your cars ability will help you in every section. Go to medicalschoolhq.net/Jack Westin to check out his course that you can sign up for using that link by saving $100 as well. When you use that link, I do get a small commission. So if you do plan on signing up, you get a discount and I get a little beer money. I appreciate it if you use that link. You can check out his free resources as well. He's got a cars passage every day delivered to your inbox. So go check that out. Again, jackwestin.com or medicalschoolhq.net/Jack Westin to activate that $100 off coupon. Today, we're diving into another article, breaking it down to help you understand what the MCAT car section is hoping to get from you. If you are listening to this in your podcast app, just tap the image, swipe left or swipe right. Do a little matchmaking here in the podcast app, and there will be a link to this article so that you can follow along with us. Jack Westin back for some more MCAT Cars Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How's it going?
I'm excited. I love all the feedback that we're getting with these podcasts. I hope that students are learning and reading along with us and critically thinking through these passages like the way we want them to. So, and obviously that it results in higher scores too.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, reading is so essential for anything you do, right? So hopefully this helps not just for cars, but everything.
Yeah. All right. So this week we have a great passage here for you from citylab.com. That's interesting. I don't know that one, but I'm interested to know. Anything that we need to know about this one before we dive in?
So this is a passage I like because topic isn't as interesting, and that's usually what the test does. They put in topics that are not that interesting, and it discusses something that most people are not aware of or don't think about, but happen to kind of see all the time. So it's a great way of looking at something in a different way than you're normally accustomed to. So interested to see how students react to this passage. One of the things I really like about this passage is that it educates you as you read it. And that is a very common theme on the MCAT. They like to educate you as you read because they want to make sure that you're a good learner, you're a good student. Good students are able to read something, understand it, and apply it on the questions. That's at least what they want you to do on the test. Okay.
All right. So let's get started here. First paragraph, when it comes to the quality of public transit, comparisons between American cities and international counterparts are usually met with a simple response. It's different over there. All right, so first paragraph, it looks like we're setting up some sort of discussion potentially about public transit and comparisons between American cities and international cities. And whatever those comparisons are, it seems like somebody's response is it's different over there, meaning we can't compare them because it's different.
Right. Now, when it says public transit, that could mean so many things.
Yeah.
Right. It could mean like bus rides, trains, who knows? Maybe bicycles for all we know.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe taxis, who knows? But public probably means something that many people use. So we'll see how that goes. Go ahead.
Okay. Second paragraph. These differences, the argument goes, are vast and fundamental. Europe is far more densely built, and its older cities, settled centuries before the automotive age, will always be innately transit-friendlier. So the first comparison is built up here that Europe, densely built, older cities, and for whatever reason, being before the automotive age, it means it's transit friendlier. I'm not sure why that would mean that, but that's what this first sentence is saying.
Right. I mean, most people would probably assume that older cities have worse transit systems, right? Because transit means like using of technology to move from one place to another. Usually that's what most people assume, but that would be the wrong assumption here because they're telling you it's friendlier, right? And that, I mean, I don't think most people would agree with that. I mean, unless you are, you know the structural designs of the cities themselves and you know understand the history of transportation, but that's what they're saying. The most important part about this sentence is that they're saying before the automotive age, right? Transit is friendlier.
Yeah.
So there's something about the automotive age, which is cars, right, that affects public transit in some way. We don't know exactly how or why, but to some degree, it's detrimental to public transit. That's something that you have to assume. They're trying to create that connection here. And that's something I would expect students to visualize and understand. Okay, go ahead.
In Asian cities, meanwhile, explosive urban growth has been accompanied and accelerated by massive government investments in urban rail networks. So the opposite here, Asian cities versus European cities, they're saying urban growth versus densely populated cities. The government is spending money for rail networks.
Right. Now they're bringing up rail networks. We haven't really discussed what public transit is until now, right? It's saying rail network. So maybe something to do with trains. Okay. And yeah, it's just a fact, right? Asian cities are investing more. Okay.
Yeah. That's where you hear all the bullet train stuff.
Right.
But the US boomed in the 20th century's automobile age, and the private car is still king. Most American cities and their suburbs are utterly dependent on them. So here's the comparison. We're set up with Europe and then Asia, and now US is saying the private car is king and American cities are built or are dependent on them.
Right. That's all we really know. I mean, we could go further and say, well, if they have more automotive stuff going on, maybe they're less transit friendly. It's not a bad assumption to make, but you don't need to make that assumption. All you need to know at this point is that there's a difference between the American public transit system, and the other countries and other continents, basically. So, I mean, and if you know that difference revolves around cars, you're fine. Go ahead.
All right, third paragraph. How did transit become such an afterthought in Americans' transportation habits? So now the author is setting up the question that potentially he or she may want to look into for the rest of the article.
And it's funny because the author is kind of saying it in a way that's argumentative by suggesting how the author's implying that this is the case.
Yeah.
Right. But maybe it's not the case. Maybe America does value transportation, right? Or transit. So it's just interesting how the author decided to just automatically tell us that, look, Americans don't care about the transit system.
Yeah.
Right. And now it's asking us why. So for whatever reason, you have to know that the author believes America is backtracking or is not progressive in terms of transit. Yeah. That's been established as a hard assumption at this point.
Yeah.
Right. But why? The reason is not clear. Maybe it's automotive, right? Maybe it's not. We don't know. Okay, go ahead.
So just a pause there. So a potential cars question, a question here could be something about the author's bias about our transportation habits. And because the author tells us right here that he's saying, look, Americans didn't think about this. Now it's an afterthought.
Exactly. Yeah. Now they can ask questions about how Americans don't care about transit systems. And most students will think, well, I didn't see that in the passage. But the author established it as you read, right? Something they educated you on and mentioned it in a passing way, but it's still important for you to know.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. I addressed that question in detail in an earlier City Lab piece. So the author's just saying that they wrote another article and it links there. But to briefly summarize, transit everywhere suffered serious declines in the post-war years. The cost of cars dropped, and new expressways linked cities and fast-growing suburbs. So it looks like the author's trying to set up a reason as to why potentially this happened, where we are dependent on cars. The price dropped, and we had new roadways, new expressways linking all the cities and suburbs.
Right. This is the reason, right?
Yeah.
Why are we using more cars? It's cheaper, apparently. Okay, go ahead.
That article pointed to a key problem. The limited transit service available in most American cities means that demand will never materialize, not without some fundamental changes. So the author's, it looks like it's going on to say that in the other article, it looks like he's pointing to that we have this limited transit service and we won't have a need for it because we have cars and roads.
Yeah, and the fact that we don't have that many of them limits us, right? It just, people don't even think about them, right? It's an afterthought, essentially.
Yeah.
So that's exactly right. We're not thinking about it. The demand will never increase simply because we have cars, and really it's because we don't have that many to begin with.
Okay.
All
right. Fourth paragraph. The U.S. did see a resurgence of transit spending on big projects in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but the period. And so it's interesting. So the author in the previous paragraph talks about post-war cars. Prices were dropping, expressways were built, and so we didn't need changes.
Right.
But then in this paragraph, he's saying, well, there were some changes. There was a resurgence in spending in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s.
Why would the author say that?
I don't know.
See, that's the confusing part for most students.
Yeah.
When you see something and then it automatically contradicts itself, right? I mean, we were saying there aren't that many, and now they're saying they are. It confuses many, many students. But remember that this is the first sentence of the paragraph. And the author is most likely trying to transition into either discussing something else about this topic or further elaborate on why it actually is the case where it's limited. So in order to seem less biased, in order to seem more reasonable, the author is trying to say that, look, at some point there was an increase. But don't be surprised if the next sentence, or maybe, soon after this sentence, the author goes back to the initial argument that, hey, you know what? Even though there was a resurgence, we're still limited by, the transit's not that strong in America. So that's something the author does, or authors do, in order to seem more reasonable, in order to seem like, they've thought of everything, right?
Yeah, like don't attack me. I've thought about the other side.
Exactly. And that usually confuses students because most students will see that and go, wait, what side are we really on? The trick here is to figure out what side the author keeps talking about. That's the side the author's on, right? The author might point to the other side, but the author will always come back to the initial side that they really cared about. So let's go ahead. Let's see what the next sentence says.
All right, so the next sentence starts with but, so maybe we're back into the original thought. But there was a big difference between America's approach to big urban metro projects and that of Canadian and European cities. Even when the United States built expensive rail systems, it never took care of the basics. And so it looks like the author's being critical here of, there was a resurgence in spending, but they didn't do it right.
Exactly. And this is a common theme on the MCAT. Contrast words like but give you a lot of indication of what the author really likes, what the author really believes. Okay, so the idea that usually comes after the contrast word is the idea the author cares about. The author really wants you to know that point of view. That's not always going to be the case. You have to still read and understand what you're reading, but usually contrast words denote that the author's going back to their initial argument, which they really cared about.
And so I'm thinking of another question here about would the author think would be a better way to have spent the money or something, and there's questions and there's something about basics worded a different way about getting back to the basics or something.
Right. And that's context, the basics, right? Okay.
Cities rarely provided good, frequent local connections that allowed people to actually get to rail stations without walking or driving. So I think he's pointing out what those basics are.
Exactly.
And stating that it didn't happen. So that's why we're struggling.
Okay.
To this day, in most parts of American cities, it is all but impossible to get anywhere on a Sunday at 8 p.m. by transit. And if you miss the bus, you might be waiting an hour or more for the next one. So again, just another example of our failures.
Yeah, and this is probably the limiting factor on why demand will probably never increase, right? Because the basics are not there, okay?
Such a situation is virtually unheard of in most other developed countries, where even many small villages have a relatively regular bus. So again, the bringing back up the comparison U.S. to in other countries, that they have more buses and more connections, it looks like.
Yep.
All right. So next paragraph. That's the fundamental problem that makes transit useless for most people in most American cities. So the fundamental problem, I would read that and go, wait a minute, what's the fundamental problem? And I guess they're saying, look, you can't get anywhere at 8 p.m. If you miss the bus, you're going to be waiting. You have to walk or drive somewhere to get to another train station.
Right.
So that's the issue there. Okay. The key to great transit service is not about getting 100% of the people to ride transit for 100% of trips. So it looks like the author, he or she is trying to now define potentially what great transit service is.
Yeah, I mean, the author is simply saying that, look, it's not about everyone riding the transit system, right? And that goes back to availability. The author's trying to point that it's about availability, whether or not it's easily accessible.
Yeah. It's about giving people a viable choice of getting around without needing to drive. And so it looks like finishing off there with the author's perspective on what would make a good transit system, and just giving people the choice. Do I want to drive, or can I take a bus or a train or something?
Okay, great. So what do you think's the big picture of this passage? Like, what do you think the author's trying to convey after reading this passage?
Oh, I think the author is basically saying we screwed up our transit system and other countries have done it right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Screwed up is a little bit too extreme, right? But because sometimes they do use that kind of language, and you have to be aware that the author is very passionate about how this is such a mess up. But it's more of a critical kind of neutral response to this idea of how there isn't that much transit going on in America because of the automotive reason, right? The automotive argument. Yeah, that's great. And knowing the basics of and like the problems associated with it, the reasoning behind it is very important. So the reasoning is the automotive part, right? But also accessibility. Those are all very important as well. So great.
All right, so there you have it. Hopefully that was a helpful one for you, diving into another article, breaking down more paragraphs, more sentences, and hopefully giving you an idea of what to expect with what the MCAT is really hoping to have you understand when it comes to the MCAT. Again, if you're looking into some more in-depth help from Jack Westin, go check out the CARS course that he puts on about every month. medicalschoolhq.net/Jack Westin will get you that $100 off coupon. Hope you have a great week. We'll see you next time here on the MCAT CARS podcast.